Thank you so much for being here.
Great. Thank you all. It's so great to be here. I'm excited because Ralph is a buddy of mine that we've been working on some projects with. So happy to be here and also excited to hear about you all and your work too. I'm Sally Guzik. I'm a vice president with Fourth Economy, and I'll talk a little bit more about Fourth Economy. But my background really over the past 20 years has focused on inclusive community engagement and outreach. And I've done that through environmental soil and water analysis and contracts with the EPA and Army Corps of Engineers, getting them to think about inclusivity. I've done that as a doula with second language speaking moms and teen moms, getting them to think about inclusivity in terms of working with communities that have faced low infant mortality or high infant mortality rates. And I've done that with urban forestry coalitions and nonprofits and with the tech and innovation districts throughout the country. And now I get to kind of continue that work. So I really have a wide range of what that means of broad-based community engagement and how we think about it in terms of being diverse and inclusive. So I'm excited to talk about that today, but I'll talk a little bit more about Fourth Economy too. We're an economic development consulting firm, but we really bring a diverse range of expertise to the table that allows us to assist communities and organizations to achieve wide-ranging economic goals. So for our core focus, that really looks at economic vision and action plans, anything from outdoor and cultural economy strategies to climate change and impact analysis. We do a lot with workforce and affordable housing strategies, economic mobility and industry trend forecasting, and also kind of cluster development. So I'm really excited to kind of provide the lens of, how do we think about community engagement and outreach, and how do we define those terms? What does it mean when we're saying diversity, equity, and inclusion? And how does that kind of all tie together to economic development work? So I will turn it over to Ralph to introduce himself and Huckel Inclusive.
Thank you, Sally, and nice to see friendly faces again with my Fourth Economy crew. Ralph Taveras, he, him series for my pronouns, and I'm a lead consultant with Huckel Inclusive. I've been with Huckel for a couple of years. Aside from that, my full-time work, I work for Diversified Search Group, which is an executive search firm that does executive search. I specifically work in the education practice, and I'm a managing associate for equity and inclusive excellence. So within the firm and within the ed practice, I help our team elevate historically excluded candidates from the leadership suite of higher education, independent schools, nonprofit leadership that are education adjacent. So I'm not a headhunter, but I know a whole lot of headhunters that could connect you if anybody's interested. I work with our team to elevate best practices, but I also work with colleges and universities and schools around the country with their specific search committees to make sure that they're mitigating bias and reviewing resumes the right way and making sure that we have shared agreements with a search committee to ensure that all voices are being heard. That experience is informed by my 20 years in higher education. I've done everything from undergraduate admissions, international admissions, domestic multicultural student recruitment initiatives back in the early 2000s when they called it multicultural student recruitment. I then moved on to Providence College to serve as a dean of their multicultural scholarship program, which was the program that I graduated from. So it was like a full homecoming. That then led me over to Roger Williams University School of Law, where I was the diversity lead over there. So all of that has been brought to all the spaces that I've been in, and certainly with the work that I've been able to do with Fourth Economy. So I could tell you a little bit about Huckel Inclusive. We're a DEI consulting firm. We help organizations with their DEI work. And I think our approach, and as I didn't mention this, but I was an English major, and funny enough, Ethan Huckel, who runs the firm, was also an English major. And I think that's how we were just perfectly aligned, because so much of it is about our narratives and our stories and how much that informs our practice. So we use that sort of foundation point for strategic planning and leadership coaching. We do a whole lot of workshop and facilitations and listening sessions, but we also try to think strategically about how we bring DEI efforts into organizations and make those efforts sustainable.
Great. So we're going to run through a little bit of a slide deck that we have with some examples and some things that we've learned along the way, but feel free to add some questions in the chat or kind of raise your hand and we can stop along the way. And as Sarah mentioned, we'll also guard some time at the end of the hour so that we can have a more candid conversation. But just to frame this, giving some examples of what we've heard in this space, both from Huckel Inclusive and Fourth Economy as to why this matters or kind of where some of the tension points have been coming up when we're talking about active or continued in community engagement. We've heard that, sometimes organizations, everything from the municipal to the state level, nonprofits, education institutions, definitely always have capacity constraints that limit the ability to coordinate, plan, and convene community members. We've also heard that collaborating with other groups of individuals is sometimes helpful to provide an objective perspective. So sometimes bringing in a consultant team could be helpful because there's an opportunity to really incorporate some national best practices, promising practices, and lessons learned from other communities. We've also heard, if you could go to the next slide, Abby, that if the public is not involved in the decision-making process, which we've all can probably agree, that implementation can and will be more difficult because they weren't a part of that initiation. And we'll talk a little bit about that too, how you can thread that through. We've also heard that sometimes there's a benefit to a neutral convener to remove participation or power dynamic barriers that may exist within communities. So that's sometimes where Ralph and I's work come in a lot, is to make sure that we're kind of neutralizing some of both of the convening spaces, but also the people in attendance, and making sure that there's active participation across leadership levels. And then we've heard, community partners on the other end, the ones that are always asked to be participating or asked to be a supporter or convener. Sometimes they don't have the trust in the organizations wanting to build partnerships due to some of the nearsighted approaches of the past. So I'll also turn it to Ralph to share kind of any additional comments on what we've heard before we get into it too.
Yeah, and we'll get a little bit more into some of the nitty-gritty of that. But I can sort of pull from some of my experience in higher ed, and funny enough, all the experiences I've had after that. We have long had a transactional relationship with DEI. And oftentimes we approach DEI as a goal versus a commitment on behalf of our organizations, our teams, our institutions. If it's a goal, it's just sort of like a checkbox, like we did it, off we go. A commitment is something that looks and feels a little bit different. Also, what happens in this work, like we love a good acronym, diversity, equity, and inclusion have become DEI. And so our words and our word choices reflect this sort of blanketed approach without a clear definition of what it is, which each one of those, letters, words represents, and more importantly, like how you build an action plan from that. Usually the definitions that we see around and hear about DEI are usually on the hopeful side and intention side rather than outcomes. Like, you've heard every definition of diversity before, like diversity is all the ways that we're different. Like diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is breakdancing like nobody's watching, equity is like, I don't know, like the potato salad. But whatever it is, like, let's be clear, those definitions are fine if we're talking about intentions. But how do you measure that? Additionally, without a clear definition of what diversity, equity, and inclusion is, or DEI, how do we know that DEI is working? And how do we know if we're even doing it well? How do we go back to it and continue to measure to, consistently improve what we're doing? And even further, why is your team looking to improve DEI efforts? Why is this work important to you and your team? DEI is not a box to be checked. It is not a problem to be solved, but a sustainable strategy that needs to be integrated in all that we do, all that we vision, and all that we plan, which is, again, very different from this sort of transactional history we've had with DEI. In the more recent history, in the wake of the summer of 2020, we were forced to watch because we were in the pandemic too. We watched the public murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and many institutions, many colleges, many corporations, you name it, in this country and around the world, they jumped into solidarity statements, and in some action items. Let's hire some Black and brown folks. We got to do it quickly. Let's bring in this shiny keynote speaker to talk about anti-racism. What is anti-racism? And then like a whole education of that front. Let's put this, let's put on more trainings for our teams and our committees. But what we've noticed is that these approaches are not sustainable if they're not integrated into a deeper strategy. And further, our efforts fail without DEI defined in terms of outcomes. And our outcomes usually are reflective of, demographic composition of our efforts, our teams, our organizations, the structural success, which leans a little bit more onto the equity part of this, and the environments and some of the outside influence when we're talking about equity and we're talking about justice.
Great. So Ralph and I are going to go through these 5 areas that by no means is it all encompassing of kind of all of the considerations of community engagement, but I think it gives or will give some perspective into like, how can you think about the nuances for your community? And when you're thinking about defining diversity, equity, and inclusion, the understanding that that has to be specific to the community that you're serving, that diversity and inclusion and what that means to be equitable is going to be different based on the people that you serve and work with. So we'll talk through what that means to listen to community partners and to build those authentic relationships. We'll talk about those physical and non-physical, like accessible entry points for community partners, how to inform challenges and barriers that need to exist, and really talking about the essential, information about lived experiences, that qualitative piece that sometimes gets overlooked, but it's just as valuable, and can also point to other types of quantitative information to be measured in terms of what people are experiencing. And then finally, we'll talk about why it's important to think through how can you all work together, continue to work together to collaborate and share some best practices. So Ralph is going to get us started.
Great. So the first question or not question, but prompt is really thinking about, are we listening? Are we actually listening to the communities that we're working with? And even beyond that, thinking about the environment in which we listen and the container that we are building for listening sessions. When we are like literally designing listening sessions within with our community partners, are we thinking about how inclusive those sessions actually are? Are we thinking about accessibility within those sessions, from the timing of our listening sessions to Zoom versus in person, to the locations we've chosen to have a meeting? If the buildings that we have those meetings in are accessible for people with physical disabilities. Also, when thinking about listening sessions, we should think about the objectives to those sessions and make sure that we communicate the objectives and the goals with our community partners. Are we sending agendas prior to the meetings to talk about exactly what we're going to talk about? Are we clear about what the outcomes are from those listening sessions? And do we have a set of, notes afterwards, action items, and things that continue to prompt us and move us forward? One of the efforts that Sally and I worked on, we were working closely with the Fourth Economy effort in Rhode Island, and we had many of our meetings in person, and we had done a lot of engagement with folks in Zoom. But this last meeting, most of the engagements were on Zoom, and we didn't have a lot in person. That's what I meant to say. But this last meeting, one of the folks on our team, I believe he was a pretty prominent person in Rhode Island. He said, I hear what you're saying, but I really want to see you in person, and I think we need to get everybody in the same room. And this person happened to be a white male that held a lot of positional power. And so like, yes, let's do it. So we ended up having this meeting in Newport, Rhode Island for this final meeting. Now, it was on a Monday morning, which then you have to think about accessibility. It was in Newport. If you've ever been to Newport, Rhode Island, the traffic is wretched. And if you have ever tried to travel without a car to Newport, Rhode Island, RIPTA is not our friend. So let's play this out when we think about accessibility and the listening sessions where we want folks to come in and be a part of what we're building. We're offering a training session or a program or anything for, engagement on a Monday morning, not on direct bus lines. Who are we expecting to attend? Can people who rely on RIPTA attend? Can people who have little ones at home plan to attend? Can people who are reliant on current employment attend? You know, if somebody has a job, can they literally afford to take a day off from work to attend a meeting or a training for, you know, things that are being built and nothing that's really being compensated for? And can people with physical disabilities attend and take advantage of the opportunities that we're even talking about? Have we made opportunities accessible? How often are we having listening sessions or community conversations with our partners? Is it one and done? Is it right before the deadline for a grant proposal or a huge opportunity, and then we ghost those partners until the next opportunity comes along? Is there follow-up conversation? It goes on and on and on. And unfortunately, because we've had this transactional relationship with DEI, our community leaders that we hope to engage, they can smell this a mile away. And therein lies a lot of challenges when we talk about trust and we talk about relationship building. So we can go to the next slide. And that gets us to the next question. Are we trusted? Thinking about those containers that we build for a listening session and to bring in the community partners that we want to, and the relationships we may or may not have forged yet. Are we trusted partners? DEI doesn't sustain itself in silos. And again, we talked a little bit about this in our earlier when I talked about the sort of transactional history that we've had. In Rhode Island, one of the things that many of our organizations go to, we have two prominent organizations that lead a lot of the economic development stuff. Rhode Island Black Business Association and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, run by Lisa Ranglin and Oscar Mejia, respectively. And unfortunately, whenever there is a call for proposal or there is a call to engage with the community, it's like, well, we got to call Lisa, we got to call Oscar. And there's nothing wrong with either of them. They're wonderful people. I love them. And our state, I truly believe, has transformed because of them. But it is tokenizing to only engage two people or organizations in this space and check the box. And, you know, and I'm thinking now about Lisa and Oscar, my two friends who lead these efforts. It's not fair to them or their organizations, especially when their orgs themselves have limited capacity to handle all of the checkbox works that everybody is sending to them. And quite frankly, there are so many more organizations within the state that people can partner with, but just have not taken the time to bridge the gap and bridge access to the conversations that need to be had. So again, it's this question about, can we move away from this transactional sort of relationship that we've had with many of our partners and think about what sustainability actually looks like? We can go to the next one too. And while we're thinking about, again, that design of listening sessions and design of partnerships, are we actually designing for active participation? AWDOETBIM or AWCMB, everybody knows what that acronym is, right? Are we designing our engagements to be more inclusive, or are we creating more barriers? Everybody knows that. And it's a joke, clearly. But I remember like the first Blue Economy meeting that I went to. You heard my background. I'm higher ed. I'm an English major, which means I don't do anything particularly well, but I can communicate pretty well. But I came into this first Fourth Economy meeting and we were talking about Blue Economy. And I'm a DEI practitioner. I have no knowledge of offshore wind or wind turbines or sustainable energy. And yeah, I was invited into the space to be a different thought partner to think about our commitments to DEI in this space. The reason I got involved was a very dear friend of mine. Her name is Relly Abbiati, and she worked under Senator Whitehouse and has been somebody who has been really driving the state towards these very big opportunities. So she invited Huckel Inclusive in. And I remember the first meeting like it was yesterday. Like, we had all these, you know, scientists, researchers, policymakers, practitioners, governors, you name it. And here I am, and I suffer from chronic imposter syndrome, and that's a TED Talk for a whole other day. But every second of this meeting, I am tapping on Relly's shoulder. I'm like, what was that acronym? What was that grant program? What was Build Back Better? Who was the first offshore wind? And it was just question after question. I felt like I needed, it's almost like if anybody is into like the Marvel movies, it's like watching the Avengers movie and the first movie that you watch is Endgame, which is the very last one, none of it would make sense because there were like 16 movies before that. And there's a lot of context of like, who is this person with the purple face? Like, you need desperate context before you can start engaging. Maybe the second meeting, I said something that I don't think I will ever live down. And I see Christine Smith on the call, but I almost paused everybody. I said, you all need to put this in crayon for me. I have no freaking clue what any of you were talking about. And everybody busted out laughing. And because the dissonance was deafening, here we had folks in the room saying that not only did they want more participation from the communities that we wish to uplift, but that there were seats at the table. Like, we want to engage community. We are welcoming everybody. We really want folks to be a part of this effort. Open arms, and to think about how, you know, some of these grant opportunities were poised to help systemic racism and inequality. So we have that, and yet we were having trouble filling the rooms. People would RSVP, they wouldn't show up. There was a disconnect either from, you know, the physical location or the timing, or just this question of accessibility and thinking about how we're designing these sessions. We started, from that point on, we started framing our conversations differently. And instead of having sort of these open forums where we invite a whole lot of people in to listen and, you know, invite everybody, fireside chat, we did the more tedious, but I think impactful work of meeting with leaders and organizations one-on-one. And further, we framed the conversation differently. So you got these grant opportunities that are promising a whole lot of money, which is really attractive. But again, if you don't have trust, people can smell it a mile away. So instead of just promising folks money, we opened up the conversation with my experience that I just shared with you in an observation. It's like, look, you probably have no idea what the blue economy is. And before we tell you about the opportunity, what questions do you have? This is the beginning of a conversation, and we don't want to assume that you know what we're talking about. And from that moment on, I mean, the conversations just started opening up, and people felt that they could be vulnerable to say, actually, I have no idea what this is either, but it sounds really cool. And there was this one organization, Rhode Island for Communities of Justice. And we were talking, we had framed it that way, but we were starting to talk about these work opportunities and workforce and offshore wind jobs. And we're like, oh, these offshore wind jobs are going to be available and this and that. But because we had left space at the beginning and framed it, Ralph, this sounds great, but what exactly are the jobs? What jobs are you talking about? It's like, oh my gosh, we didn't even tell you the kind of jobs. And then it turned into a whole other conversation because we talk way up here with acronyms and terms, et cetera. And sometimes, like, we just got to talk in crayon and be like, listen, here's what it is, and just spell it out for folks. Talk to people as if they have no idea what you're talking about. And it's different than dumbing it down. It's not dumbing it down. It's making it accessible and inviting people in to be participants and to be engaged in a different kind of way. We've seen all the research about why diversity and inclusion helps organizations and efforts and all that stuff. And yet we are gatekeepers with some of the context and information that is so necessary to have those voices at the table. So it's not, you know, it's great to have the seats at the table, but is having seats at the table enough? You really have to create pathways to the table and make sure that everybody comes in and is ready to participate.
And I'll
Next
add to
slide.
that a little bit more, actually. You know, that part of listening, I think sometimes what we see is there's like one type of engagement. There's, okay, well, we hosted one session, we did this one event, and some people showed up, some people didn't. And what we really try to let people know is, hey, this has to be layered. You have to think about it in terms of like, does there need to be a survey? Can there be a comment box? Can you do office hours at a library? Can you show up in other spaces? And we'll talk a little bit about like that physical space of designing. But I think even thinking through of it as continued engagement versus like just this one stop of we're going to do an activity, because that's really where the trust comes in of knowing, okay, is this going to be a continued ask? Is this going to be something where I'm a part of the decision-making process for a long term, or am I just being asked my opinion one time? So we listen and look for also the difference between translation and interpretation services is a big thing. You can translate documents and you can have that information readily available, and that's great. And you should be doing that for your community outreach. But also, if you're able to have an interpreter facilitate, it's very different than just translating the materials. So having somebody that can be an active interpreter on the team, both for non-English speakers, but to kind of what Ralph said too, is kind of that let's demystify some of these acronyms that we're using in the language that we're using. Let's think about the flexible meeting formats, like the blend of virtual and in person, the times that we're having them, whether that's mornings or evenings. Most people that have a 9 to 5, can't go, they're not a professional meeting goer, as we like to say. They can't kind of leave their day and take off that time. We also think a lot about those culturally responsive approaches. That could be everything from like customs and values of different communities. But then again, to Ralph's point of like that tokenization of not lumping one racial group all into the same ethnic group. We sometimes see that happen of like, well, we've engaged the Asian population. Well, actually, there's 2 different sects of Chinese language being spoken in this area. So that isn't actually the same sort of engagement or outreach. So thinking, it takes more time to be intentional. But what we've seen time and time again is that implementation does not happen well, nor is it withstanding if you don't do this work on the ground level. So, I think when you all are thinking about how to advocate for resources to be able to do this up front, coming to the table of saying like, we have some metrics, we understand that this is going to be important. Here's how we see the engagement being continued, and here's how we see the ways that it can benefit us, would really be helpful as well. And kind of thinking about, all of that education and information sharing. If there's materials that you can provide in advance of the meeting to give everybody a foundation of the language and the terms and kind of the data points that would be shared or talked about, that makes somebody feel more comfortable participating. Because to Ralph's point again, if somebody is told to show up to a meeting without an agenda or an understanding, I wouldn't feel too comfortable showing up to a meeting that I don't know anything about, and I'm not feeling like I'm going to have an understanding of what's going on. So those are just some other things to talk about, and we're going to talk about a little bit about like the physical structure of meeting too. So kind of building on this, the listening part can't just be one time. The engaging part can't just be a one-time ask. And time again, we'll see, the accessibility accommodations, they're kind of the first thing to give, but really ensuring that the physical spaces are accessible to individuals with physical disabilities. I remember doing work in Philadelphia, and we picked a spot that was on the train line, but it was 6 stops away from a stop that has an elevator. And that's something that's just so nuanced that you would have to be from the area to know about, but it's also so important. Like, okay, as somebody that's in a wheelchair going to go, 6 or 7 more blocks to be able to get to that building? Probably not, depending on the weather, especially if it's winter. Like, should there be, a virtual engagement or an evening one? We've thought about, what's that transportation support look like, offering free or subsidized like tokens or cards or vouchers or reimbursements for folks that have that limited mobility. Are you able to arrange shuttle services, like use public transportation passes or buses? Those are all things that are really creative solutions to a huge problem that prevents people from showing up. Another way that we see this is, childcare and family-friendly environments. If you're able to offer on-site childcare or partner with a resource or a center, or another thing that we like to recommend is like, how can you involve children in the planning process? I think we oftentimes assume that adults are the only ones that can contribute to this, or high school students and middle schoolers, but you'd be really surprised of like what a coloring activity of asking a child like what would they want to see in their neighborhood can really bring. And getting them involved, it kind of serves a dual purpose, getting folks involved younger and having them have exposure to that civic engagement really has them thinking about being engaged long term. We talked a little bit about that language support. So thinking about the difference between translation and interpreters, having bilingual facilitators can be a huge benefit. Technology accessibility, we've kind of heard it both ways from the pandemic. We've heard that a lot of parents and people that are small business owners, or people that have a difficult shift of work, virtual sometimes can be great for them, but folks that don't have access to those technology at their hand, working with a library is great because libraries are still seen as like the front line for community and direct services. They have a good understanding of the neighborhood, community centers, all of those things. Then thinking through like clear and timely communication. I think not having an ask that's clear, not providing background information, but the biggest mistake that can also be made is just that non-follow-up or follow through, like letting a website go stale, letting the conversation end. And even if there's a lag in between, we recommend to say to folks, hey, like this part of the engagement is coming to a close. This is what we've done so far. This is where it'll be going. This is where we think you'll be able to plug back in. And even if you don't have all of those answers, it removes some of that concern that like, hey, I was just engaged with one time and then I don't know what happened. I don't know if that project ever went through or if anything happened because the website's down and there's no updates and we don't understand kind of what the next step is. So thinking through, I'll pass it to Ralph to talk through like the community engagement on the organization level, because I think what he and Relay did in Rhode Island was really impactful of having those one-on-one conversations to build trust, to build understanding, and thinking about, other barriers to engagement too.
Yeah, so what Relly and I ended up doing, and I'm shouting out Christine Smith, who's on the call, who was a part of a lot of these conversations as well. We, with that sort of new framing of what is Blue Economy, how do we get you involved, we had Christine, who was an expert who knows all about the Blue Economy, who was there to almost facilitate with us. So we were the folks that were sort of on the front line to say, hey, we're here to help, bridge the opportunity. And you may have a lot of questions about what exactly Blue Economy is. And vulnerability, like, I don't know anything about Blue Economy, but here's somebody who could tell you all the A, B's, and C's about it. And Relly and I both know a lot of people within the community, so that's helpful too. But having the content expert in the room at the same time just made those meetings were just so much more impactful. And we did, after we had some of these rounds of one-on-ones with organizations and community leaders, we started seeing different faces in the room. Not a huge avalanche, but certainly it was building. There was momentum, and I think there continues to be. In addition to those one-on-one sessions, once you've had that, then we were starting to invite folks to some of the bigger ones where you can have almost a forum and have, now that folks understand what it is and they have some content, now you can invite them into a space and they can begin asking questions, and then they take their expertise and can actually help uplift efforts more than they were. So I think just before you think about how oftentimes we start here, it's just like, let's have a big community forum. And then people come in and they feel, disconnected. They're like, what are we talking about? It was sort of building up to that and thinking about how scaffolding is really important.
And the last thing I would add to that too is, we've seen where sometimes an engagement strategy that the community thinks is going to work doesn't work, and you get 2 RSVPs. And so we have folks being like, well, we did it. We did what we thought we could. We sent out the invite. We gave people a chance. They had it on social media. And where we challenge some of our partners a little bit is to think about, okay, this didn't work and we didn't get the result that we wanted. You said that, for this to be successful, we would need to see 50 people attending a meeting like this. So like we have to go back to the drawing board and we have to think of a new way to approach it. So I think sometimes some folks get caught up in the timelines, and if you can readjust and do it again and do it right. And at times that may mean like recognizing like where your mistakes were made, where you could have done better, or trying just a different approach in general, pulling in different community partners and asking more questions and thinking through like, okay, did I go through kind of my checklist of like barriers? Like, is there a language barrier? Is there a transportation? Kind of, is it the date, the time? Kind of thinking through all of those barriers that we just talked about and kind of pivoting. And then lastly, I will say, kind of on the engaging in a variety of ways, sometimes you have to apologize. And apologizing could be, I'm sorry that we haven't included you before. That wasn't right. We want you to be a part of the process right now. I'm sorry that we didn't provide the correct information. How can we do better? And I think sometimes people also get afraid to just be like, I'm sorry, that didn't work. We didn't do it right. How could we help you? How could we do that better? And having that humility and vulnerability with your own community goes a long way of trying to get it better and right.
I'll also add to that too, when we think about engagement from our vantage point and how we can invite people in, we also have to think about where we're invited in and how are we outside of our needs, how are we centering the needs of our organizations? Are we going to their events? Are we going to their community conversations or the things that they're doing? When they start to see familiar faces, when they start to see that you are in fact not there transactionally and that there is a commitment level, it's relational versus transactional, and you'll start to see different results, I guarantee it.
So we wanted to close out a little bit about talking through like how you all can also support each other and where we see this tied to some of our work that's national. Sharing those lessons learned. Again, this has a little bit of that humility piece in it, but it's also just being transparent with the folks that you're working with. So, making sure that there's regular community updates and that you are consistent with your communication. You're sending thank you notes after interviews. You're sending thank you notes after a session with an update. You're making information publicly available and accessible, and thinking through what that means for your community. So if that needs to be online and in print or at particular places or sharing at events, like Ralph mentioned, but being transparent on the outcomes is really important. Thinking about some of those learning sessions that could happen of, oftentimes we don't get a chance to do debriefs around engagement processes, but thinking through like, how could we have done this better? What did we miss? And inviting the community into those conversations too. Using the online platforms that you may have in social media to share those updates, project milestones, lessons learned. I think those are all really good practices to be thinking about. Thinking about an advisory committee or a community partnership that can be established, that can be continued engagement, maybe seen as a board of sorts versus kind of a one-time convening of an engagement. Is also helpful. Thinking about the age range. Again, we've established some advisory committees where we have like a junior board of like high schoolers, and that's a really cool thing that they want to be involved in, and they want to have an understanding of kind of, oh, I'm actually helping to shape some of the decisions that are being made in my community. Like that's building a talent pipeline for people that are going to be really great community partners in the future. And so thinking through kind of that life cycle of like, how are we engaging the youth as well is really, really important. This is our future workforce. This is the people that will be caring for us when we're older. So, thinking through kind of how that range happens is really important. And then that storytelling piece, it's so compelling to hear about the lived experiences and the outcomes and kind of some of the case studies or promising practices that you may find. So sharing, the good things that happen and kind of what you think the why is behind them, but also like the challenging things, like where mistakes are made or where you think you could have done better. Encouraging you all to have that shared dialogue and finding communities that are similar in some particular way to your approach or effort is really helpful to kind of get out of your own box and kind of bounce ideas off of other people that are in different places as well.
Nope, I can chime in. Sorry. I would also add to this, and I think it was shared earlier that many of you are representing institutions or colleges or universities, and within our organizations, we carry a lot of privilege. And I'm leaning on what Sally shared about, using social media, et cetera. But how about we start elevating some of our community organizations through our channels and through our privilege with these, institutions that we represent? If there's a partner that we really want to collaborate with, why don't we uplift some of the things that they're doing and share the good news that they're doing? And it's hard because you're transitioning from community partner to being a community member. And we forget about that sometimes. Many of our colleges and universities sit as bubbles in bigger or smaller towns, and we have to think a little bit differently about, again, the transactional relationship that we've always seemed to have when it comes to these efforts.
Yeah, we wanted to leave a little bit of time to talk about, what you all found interesting from this conversation, if it brought up any ideas, any challenges or barriers.